Imagine you're standing in a crowd. Someone does something you know is wrong. You notice it. You hesitate. But then you look around. Nobody stops them. Someone laughs. Another person joins. Then another. And suddenly, the thing that felt wrong 30 seconds ago doesn't feel quite as wrong anymore. You haven't changed your values. Nobody gave you a new set of morals. So what changed? The crowd. And here's the disturbing part. You might think the dangerous person is the one who started it. But psychology suggests something much more uncomfortable. Sometimes, the real danger begins when ordinary people stop asking, "What would I do?" and start asking, "What is everyone else doing?" Before this is over, I'm going to show you how that tiny shift can turn an ordinary decision into something you might never have chosen alone. But first, I want you to put yourself inside the situation. Someone makes a cruel joke. You don't laugh. Then 5 people around you laugh. So you smile. Not because you found it funny, but because suddenly, not laughing feels uncomfortable. Nobody forced you. Nobody threatened you. You simply noticed what everyone else was doing and adjusted yourself to fit the room. That's where the story begins. Because your first compromise probably won't feel like a compromise. It might be something incredibly small. You laugh when you don't want to laugh. You stay quiet when you want to speak. You agree with something you don't actually believe. You tell yourself it's not important. And because nothing terrible happens immediately, the next step becomes easier, then another, and another. Until eventually, you look back and realize that you crossed a line you would have sworn you would never cross. So why didn't you stop yourself? One of the answers can be found in a famous series of experiments conducted by psychologist Solomon Asch. Participants were shown lines of different lengths and asked to identify which line matched a reference line. The answer was obvious. But there was a catch. The other people in the room were working with the experimenter. They deliberately gave the wrong answer. Again and again. And then, the real participant had to answer in front of everyone. The strange part wasn't that everyone suddenly became unable to see the correct answer. They could see it. The pressure came from something else. They were standing alone against the group, and many participants eventually went along with an answer they knew was wrong. Think about that. They didn't necessarily change their beliefs. They changed their behavior. And that's one of the most uncomfortable things about conformity. You don't always have to convince someone that the crowd is right. Sometimes, you only have to make them uncomfortable enough about standing alone. Now imagine that happening outside a laboratory. Imagine you're at a party. Someone starts mocking another person. You feel uncomfortable. But everyone laughs. You look around. Nobody seems bothered. So you think, maybe I'm taking this too seriously. The joke becomes an insult. The insult becomes humiliation. And now something inside you is saying, this has gone too far. But nobody else is saying it. So you remain silent. This is where the psychology becomes darker. Because your silence doesn't necessarily mean you agree. But from the outside, it can look exactly like agreement. And now imagine 10 people are watching. One person thinks, someone should stop this. Another thinks the same thing. And another. Everyone assumes someone else will act. So nobody does. Psychologists Bibb Latané and John Darley studied this kind of situation extensively. Their research helped demonstrate how the presence of other people can affect whether an individual intervenes. And one of the mechanisms is called diffusion of responsibility. The more people who are present, the easier it can become to feel that responsibility belongs to everyone, which strangely can make it feel like it belongs to no one. Think about that. The crowd doesn't have to tell you to do something wrong. Sometimes it only has to make you believe somebody else will deal with it. And if everyone thinks that way, nothing happens. But then something even more interesting begins. You stop thinking of yourself as one person standing inside a crowd. You begin thinking of yourself as part of the crowd. And that distinction matters. Because your internal question changes. Instead of asking, what am I doing? You start thinking, what are we doing? That small change can make your behavior feel less personal. Psychologists use the term Deindividuation to describe certain situations in which people can experience reduced self-awareness and a weaker sense of individual identity or responsibility. Anonymity can contribute. So can strong emotions. So can the feeling that you're simply one person among hundreds. Think about being in a massive crowd. Your voice blends into hundreds of voices. Your movements blend into hundreds of movements. Your identity becomes less visible. And when nobody can easily distinguish you from everyone else, it can become easier to feel like the rules that normally guide you belong to someone else. This is where the phrase, "everyone was doing it," becomes much more interesting. Because I want you to remember those 4 words. We're going to come back to them, because they contain a psychological secret that most people don't notice. Listen carefully to the sentence. It doesn't say, "I decided this was right." It doesn't say, "I wanted to hurt someone." It doesn't even say, "I believed in what happened." It says, "everyone was doing it." Notice where the responsibility goes. Away from me, toward them. That's what makes the sentence psychologically powerful. It can transform a personal decision into a group event, and when responsibility is spread across a group, each individual can feel less personally responsible. You don't necessarily have to convince yourself that what you're doing is good. Sometimes you only have to convince yourself that you're not the only one doing it. And once that happens, your question can change. Instead of asking, "Should I do this?" you start asking, "Why shouldn't I?" when everybody else already has. That tiny change can completely alter a decision. But there's something even more disturbing. The crowd doesn't only influence what you do. It can influence how you understand what you did afterward. Because once the crowd disappears, you still have to explain your behavior to yourself. And "everyone was doing it" is a very convenient explanation. It allows you to tell yourself that you were part of something larger, that you weren't really responsible, that if everyone else had stopped, you would have stopped too. Maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't. But that's exactly why we have to be careful, because sometimes the sentence is not an explanation. Sometimes it's an excuse that makes responsibility easier to carry. And this doesn't only happen in physical crowds. Today, you can join a crowd without leaving your bedroom. A comment section can become a crowd. A group chat can become a crowd. A viral video can become a crowd. You see hundreds of people laughing at someone. Then thousands. Then millions. And suddenly, mocking that person feels less like an individual decision. You're just joining in. You might tell yourself, "everyone is joking." Someone else says something worse. Another person adds to it. Then you contribute one comment. And because thousands of people are doing the same thing, your individual action can feel almost invisible. But the person on the other side doesn't experience thousands of comments. They experience yours too. The technology has changed. The psychology hasn't. And here's another uncomfortable truth. Crowds aren't automatically dangerous. The same psychological forces that can amplify cruelty can also amplify courage. People come together to protect strangers, to rescue people, to challenge injustice, to stand up against something powerful. If everyone around you is helping, helping can become easier. If everyone around you is speaking, speaking can become easier. If everyone around you is attacking, attacking can become easier. The crowd doesn't always create the behavior. Sometimes it simply lowers the psychological cost of performing it. And that gives us a much more important question. What is the crowd making easier for you to do? Because if you understand that, you can begin to understand yourself. Now I want you to imagine something. Everyone around you disappears. No audience. No laughter. No approval. No one to blame. No one to hide behind. Just you and the decision. Would you still do it? Take a second before you answer. Would you? Because if your answer changes when the crowd disappears, that's worth paying attention to. Maybe the crowd wasn't simply supporting your decision. Maybe it was helping you avoid confronting it. And this is where the story becomes personal. Think about your own life. Have you ever laughed at something you didn't find funny because everyone else was laughing? Have you ever stayed silent because you were afraid of being the only person who spoke? Have you ever joined a conversation that was becoming cruel? Have you ever watched someone being treated unfairly and told yourself, "It's not really my business"? Don't judge yourself too quickly. That's actually the point. The psychology of crowds isn't frightening because it only affects cruel people. It's frightening because ordinary people are susceptible to it too. You, me, anyone. And maybe that's why the most important moment isn't when the crowd becomes extreme. It's much earlier. It's the moment you first notice that something feels wrong, and then look around to see whether anyone else agrees with you. Because that is the moment your judgment can become dependent on the group. And sometimes, your first reaction is worth listening to. Not because your first instinct is always correct. It isn't. But because once the crowd becomes loud, your own judgment can become difficult to hear. Now think about that first moment again. Someone makes the joke. Everyone laughs. You hesitate. Then you laugh too. Maybe nothing terrible happens, but something important happened inside you. You learned that the group could influence your behavior, and if you're not careful, that lesson can repeat itself. The next time the boundary is slightly further away, then further, until one day, you're participating in something you would have condemned if you'd seen it from the outside. And afterward, you say, everyone was doing it. But here's the question. Would you have done it if nobody else was there? That question removes the crowd, the laughter, the anonymity, the excitement, the pressure, the comfort of knowing you weren't alone. And suddenly, you're left with the one thing the crowd made easier to forget. Your individual choice. Because being one of many doesn't erase the fact that you were still there. Maybe you stayed silent. Maybe you laughed. Maybe you joined. Maybe you watched. Maybe you told yourself someone else would stop it. But somewhere in that chain, there was a moment when you still had a choice. And recognizing that isn't about shame, it's about responsibility. Because responsibility isn't about pretending that social pressure doesn't exist. It's about recognizing when social pressure is beginning to make your decisions for you. So the next time you're in a group and something feels wrong, ask yourself 3 questions. Would I do this if I were completely alone? Would I still believe this was right if nobody knew I participated? And if everyone disappeared right now, would I still make the same choice? If your answer changes depending on the crowd, pay attention, because that difference may be telling you something important, not about the crowd, about you. And now we can return to those 4 words. Everyone was doing it. Maybe that's the most dangerous part, because the sentence sounds like it removes responsibility, but it doesn't. The crowd can influence you. It can pressure you. It can make something feel normal. It can make you feel anonymous. It can make it easier to stay silent. But eventually, the crowd disappears. The lights go off. The phones are put away. The noise stops. People go home. And you're left alone with the decision you made. That's when the question becomes impossible to avoid. Not, why did everyone else do it? But, why did I? And maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside the psychology of crowds. The most dangerous crowd isn't always the one that makes you do something terrible. Sometimes it's the crowd that makes you stop noticing that you're making a choice at all. Because the darkest thing about a crowd isn't that it can make bad people worse. It's that under the right circumstances, it can make ordinary people forget where the crowd ends and where they begin. So the next time everyone around you moves in the same direction, don't ask only where they're going. Ask yourself something harder. Would I still go there if I had to walk alone? Because sometimes, the most important decision in a crowd is the one you make when everyone else has already made theirs.